years, and we need to keep that in mind, especially as we look back to deal with things like PTSD and TBI. So I'm just proud to be here today. Thanks.
Thank you. My name is John Daniel Shannon. Those who know me call me Dan. I went in the Army in 1984 and discovered I love serving my country. Although I follow a plan, I got out in 1988 when we went to college, and through ROTC became an officer. I was a infantry enlisted in the 80s, and I found out I don't play politics. So I went back into enlisted duty in 1997 after being off enlisted status for 9 years, and I was pretty well known for the sniper operations I did in the 80s. So I walked right back into a sniper SWAT and became what I am, a sergeant again. And in the course of that, well, actually I spent 9.5 years in sniper operations of my 16.5 in the military. And in the course of that, I was tasked as a recruiter for the United States Army. And a lot of people don't understand only 5% of recruiters are volunteers. The other 95% of them are what's called Class 1 assignment. If you turn the assignment down and you're a career guy, you get out if you don't want to go do it. And by virtue of that, I decided never to tell a lie. And then 9/11 happened. And all the questions kids and parents would ask me about, what if we go to war? I said, well, heck, the last war we had was like Panama, and that was practically a dust-up. I told them a lie, and they went to war. And so when I was done with recruiting and I shipped to Korea, they were, for the first time since the end of the Korean conflict, they were shipping the unit permanently out of Korea to go to combat, and they needed volunteers. I tried to make number 1 on the list. I told a lie. And I never ask anybody to do anything I'm not willing to do myself, so I volunteered to go to Iraq. And once there, after being shot at before, I finally played bullet catcher and took an AK-47 round to the head in a gunfight in Ramadi in November 13th, 2004. I don't have a problem talking about that. What all people need to understand is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is as individual as a fingerprint. Mine is chronic, not severe, but chronic PTSD, revolves around responsibility. The fact I wasn't able to keep young American men from being killed or wounded. And then I lose my train of thought, so that's what I'm doing right now. Anyway, I am very, very thankful that I'm allowed to be here to speak to you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to ask the first question. I'm based in Washington, D.C., and I've been to a lot of these conferences in the last year. And I hear a lot of people talk about post-traumatic stress and the stigma associated with it, and the challenges of eliminating the stigma. And one of the things that I've noticed, a trend, is the dropping of the D, because the D associates the stigma, right? And they call it post-traumatic stress, not post-traumatic stress disorder. I think that it's an interesting first step, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on how do we, not only inside the military, but also in the national consciousness, how do we address the stigma of post-traumatic stress, and your thoughts on that. We'll start with Dan and work our way this way.
Well, first of all, one of the things that we've been discovering lately, and my wife and I try to do advocacy work for veterans, is that we're not supposed to talk about it. And forgive me, but I don't know how else to say it. That's crap. The sooner veterans talk about it, the sooner they won't ever get over it. But the sooner they take steps to learn to deal with it, and that's why I'm here to talk about it. It helps me, and hopefully it would help someone else out there. Number 2, one of the things that I have to come to grips with is that no one is going to understand it. Not really understand it. And I say that because that's a tremendous frustrator when somebody tries to help me. Okay. Number 3 is, nationally, if there could be an effort made to understand that this is a real, okay, Vietnam vets say it the best. I was in group therapy and a Vietnam veteran had to let the anger out. Like 8 Vietnam vets and 2 Iraq and Afghanistan vets. And that gentleman looked at me and he goes, "It's not fair. For over 40 years they've told us to get over it. And you guys get help now." And I agree with him. Another Vietnam vet made a wonderful comment to me. "People tell me to get over it. I haven't got it. It's got me." It's right on the money.
Thank you.
I've got to agree with Dan. You talk about it, you don't cover it up. You huddle the team up, you deal with it, whether it's military or civilian. My experience with that is one particular Special Forces Master Sergeant was a breacher. It's not it's not the stress syndrome, but it was BTI. But it was the same thing. And the way we dealt with it was when Scotty began to lose his ability to concentrate, we would say, "Hey, Scotty, come back into the group, man. Huddle. We're your team. We're going to bring you back. We don't leave you out there alone." And Dan and I were talking about it before the session. That's how you deal with PTSD as well. You don't ignore it. You deal with it. Because the longer you ignore it, a low-speed malfunction doesn't get any better with time. It just gets worse.
Right.
So you got to deal with it. And so that's the best way to approach it.
And I have two points that I'd like to add. Number one, post-traumatic stress, whether it's a disorder or post-traumatic stress, you can have the symptoms and not have a full-blown case that can be diagnosed. So we may have someone walking around who doesn't meet the criteria in the DSM-4 for post-traumatic stress disorder, but is experiencing nightmares at home. They're not necessarily even obvious to the spouse, but they wake up, they're tired, they're exhausted, their anxiety is up, they're hyper-aroused, and so they're trying to deal with it as well. So it's great that we are able to see the big picture, or the more significant picture, which is post-traumatic stress, or as a disorder. But we also have to be reminded that there are symptoms that someone may exhibit and not have the official diagnosis and or treatment for that. So sensitivity for us as a civilian population needs to be, this is my second point, we need to be a safe harbor to receive the stories that the soldiers can feel courageous enough to share with us. And to do that, that means that we don't need to be traumatized. We need to be informed, we need to be compassionate, empathic, and most of all, good listeners. And those are the 2 points that I'd like to make about PTSD up front.
I think in terms of stigma, one of the most important things is education and normalizing PTSD. People have been writing about this for thousands of years. If you read Homer's book, The Odyssey, Odysseus makes this 10-year journey home from the Trojan War, where he deals with his grief and his trauma and finally makes it home. And I think for a lot of people, they're on that, it's a metaphor, but you know, it can be a 10-year journey home. But I think education is so important because in our culture, we see mental health sometimes as a weakness.
Right.
And if you view mental health disorders as a weakness, then a diagnosis of PTSD is perceived as a confirmation of failure, when it's really no failure. Stress is something that, not only as a disorder, but stress without the disorder, it's a normal part of combat, and it also benefits people. That's what we use. I mean, people use their stress reactions as ways of self-preservation. That's avoidant behavior, but also our fight or flight behavior is what keeps us alive. And I think if people are educated about it, they know when this becomes out of hand, and that better enables them to seek help. But I also think if you understand that this is also good and positive behavior, that it can help destigmatize PTSD.
Can I do one quick follow-up
Yeah.
on that? And just to agree with what the 2 ladies have said. You know, as I said early on, this is a brotherhood and sisterhood of warriors. And warriors don't like to admit that something might be wrong. Don't like to admit that there may be a weakness. You know what I'm talking about, okay? And so, culturally, commanders and leaders and the warriors themselves need to know when to just take a knee and say, "Hey, I need some help." And we're not used to doing that sometimes. And so in units where we've been able to talk openly in small units, we would encourage each other to do that. If something's wrong, tell me. And so now as you go